Hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. I'm your host, Francesca, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Veramed Stories podcast. We have a very special episode coming at you today because unbelievably, this is the 50th episode of the podcast, which is very exciting. So to join me on this special episode, I've managed to wrangle both previous hosts to join me today. So welcome back, Ian, and welcome back, Himesh. How are you both doing today?
Hi, Francesca. Nice to speak to you again, and it's good to be back on the podcast as a guest rather than a host this time.
And Himesh, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thanks for inviting me back. It's very odd to be on this side of the microphone for once.
Yeah, I can imagine after spending so long being a host. Righty-ho. Right. So I am going to mark the start of this 50th episode with some funky stats. So as of the 30th of October, the top episode was the one where Veramed expanded into Germany, and we had over 200 streams with that episode. We have also had episodes streamed in 44 different countries across the world. So we are across every continent, which is really cool. So in the UK, we've had almost 2,500 streams. In the US, we've had over 340 streams. In Germany, we've had 182, 150 in Ukraine, and 143 in Spain. So yeah, it's bonkers to think that we are being listened to in so many different countries. Also, for the podcast, we have had almost 70 different guests on different episodes, which I think, again, is just so exciting that so many people have wanted to join and give something to the podcast. We have had many repeated guests. So Andrew Horden, Karen Horton, and Stuart Maguire have been the top 3 people who have came on multiple times. And in terms of how many episodes we've had published, Ian was the first host and he published 29 episodes. Himesh was the second and had published a whopping 40 episodes. And then myself, so far, I've had around 8 episodes so far. In terms of the longest episode, the neurodiversity one was the longest one and was the 13th most popular. We've had 22 new starter perspectives. We have met 4 of our board members, and there's one more to come, which will be published very, very soon. We've had 4 Coders Corners, and again, there's going to be more to come on some coding practices. And in terms of total streams since the first episode, we have had a whopping 3,524, which again is just crazy to think that it's been listened to that many times. And because we're statisticians, we like averages. So the average streams per month is around 148. So that's a nice statistic that I like. So in terms of, the fact that this podcast has now been going on for 50 episodes, I think it'd be really good to go back to the beginning and let's discuss how the podcast started and how it's changed since it started. So, Ian, I will direct this question to you. How did the podcast come about?
Well, firstly, before I answer that, thank you so much for sharing those statistics. As you say, I was there right from the beginning, and to see how much the podcast has grown in that time is quite remarkable, really, and a really great success for Veramed. In terms of how it started, I will admit that it was all a bit of an accident, to be honest. So
the best things start as an accident.
so it all started really when there was this idea within like the recruitment and marketing team. They came to me and they said, "Ian, we want to do some kind of blog post or some sort of marketing material around like my career journey, where I've been and obviously where I'm at now, and talking about differences between working for a big CRO and then moving to Veramed, which at the time was a small CRO. It's probably not the case now,
No.
but yeah, that's what was going on right then. So yeah, as I said, it was kind of perhaps some kind of blog post, perhaps, or some kind of audio or video material. And then I had a meeting with the marketing team where I thought we were going to just discuss this video material or blog post. And they said, so I think we want to start a podcast and we'd like you to be the host. And I was just like,
What?
right, yeah, exactly. And I'll admit, to be honest, when it first sort of was presented to me, I wasn't sure.
Mm.
I didn't think I was going to be naturally good at that kind of thing, but I also saw the benefits that it would have provided both to Veramed and to myself. So in the end, whilst I still admit that being the host of the podcast was something which was out of my comfort zone massively, I really am glad that I did do it because it kicked off the podcast. It got the podcast, off and running. And also I learned an awful lot more about the industry and as Veramed as a company.
Yeah.
And then when you start getting the feedback, when people were saying, Ian, you're doing a great job, and also you hear it from external people. Oh, listen to the podcast. That Veramed sounds great.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what I enjoyed the most about it is that, okay, whilst I'm out of my comfort zone, it is actually providing some really positive impact to Veramed.
Yep. And I think internally as well, this is something that I found that one of the things that I am really enjoying is the fact that I'm getting to talk to loads of different people across the business. Whereas I think if you don't have something like this, you can just, focus in and hone in your own little world and forget that there's, a whole big company out there with loads of different people. Is that something that you enjoyed when you were host as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It was some of the topics that we spoke about were things that I hadn't really had that much of awareness of. You hear it sort of mentioned in like newsletters and such. So the one episode which really was the first one where that came up was we talked about B Corp. B Corp is this accreditation that Veramed has. The company is basically identifies us as a company as a force for good in the industry. And I went into that episode and I knew of it. I heard about it. The marketing team would send out something saying, we have this B Corp accreditation, which was a fantastic thing. I didn't really know about it. But going through that episode and having, I think it was Andrew at the time, talk about B Corp and what it's all about, it increases your own knowledge of kind of what's going on outside of perhaps the projects that you're specifically assigned to.
Yep. Is that something that Himesh, that you knew about, was the B Corp, or was that something that kind of came to head when you were listening to the podcast, or did you kind of know about it before?
So I knew a little bit about it before, just because it's been discussed in sort of like the all staff meetings and things like this. But listening to the episode itself kind of gave more sort of context, a bit more information about that. So it was nice to hear it from that perspective as well. So and I think that's the truth for quite a lot of the episodes, where you might be slightly aware of it, but then once you hear like a proper one-on-one conversation, you get more information and context. So I think the podcast has been tremendous in that sense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Although something now, because of this B Corp, I keep seeing the B Corp initials everywhere. Now, when we had our environmental episode, I'm sure I spoke about this, but I was drinking a bottle of Evian water and I saw the B Corp on the back and I was like, oh, they're a company like ours, like we do that too. So yeah, the things that you learn actually follow you like outside of work as well. Like they can help you in loads of different situations. So Ian, do you remember, thinking all the way back when the first episode actually was? Do you remember what it was about?
I do, yes. It was obviously on the topic that I sort of mentioned already about this idea of moving from a larger CRO to a smaller one. I think it was January 2022 was the first episode, which nearly 2 years ago, which is incredible. But yeah, I had Abby Fuller on that for that episode. She went on a similar kind of journey. So she started out with Veramed to begin with, but then she went to a big CRO, but then came back to Veramed. So that was an interesting and slightly different perspective to myself. I had been at a big CRO for, I think, 4 years, and then I moved to Veramed. So it was just kind of like sort of just trying to highlight the differences between the two, kind of pros and cons of both.
Mm-hmm.
And no, it was a really interesting episode. If I must admit, I haven't listened to it probably since it came out. If I were to listen to it now, I'd probably be horrified at how uncomfortable I sounded, given it was the first one I did. But no, I think it was a great start. And what we just talked about there is something that was surprising to me in how much positive outcomes we got from it internally at Veramed. So the idea of the podcast to begin with was essentially it was an external thing. It was meant to be promote Veramed outside of Veramed people, if you like, to tell people what we're up to. But also the feedback we got was actually people internally found it interesting because it gave more context to some of these things that like Himesh said, it gets talked about at all staff meetings, but because of time limitations for such meetings, we don't have time to really go into the detail of it all. So these sorts of episodes really did help in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. So even though you're no longer the host and you haven't been for a little while now, you're obviously still heavily involved behind the scenes. So how has your role changed from being host to what you do now?
Yeah, this is something which a lot of people don't actually know about. So when I decided to hand over the reins with regards to the hosting of the podcast, it was felt that it was important that I still sort of was involved in terms of the discussions, in terms of generating the ideas for episodes, and also just ensuring that everything runs smoothly, to be honest. So the unofficial title which I got was like executive producer, as it were.
Oh, that is fancy.
This was something that Dana said. I can't say I've ever introduced myself as the executive producer of the Veramed Stories podcast, but yeah, basically what I do now is I sit in the weekly meetings that we have and sort of discuss the ideas, ensuring that we're on target in terms of number of episodes we have in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Identifying people to kind of review the episodes before they go out and things such as that. It's definitely not as hands-on as I once was, but it is great to still be involved, even if it's more of a behind-the-scenes role rather than kind of being as sort of open as being the host. Obviously, I'm very happy to come on and do the podcast every now and then, such as this, but yeah, I think going behind the scenes was certainly something. I think I actually, like I said, I like the hosting, but it was definitely something which was not my comfort zone. So the more behind the scenes kind of thing is probably something I prefer. Just.
Although, and I know you say that that's out of your comfort zone, but like when you listen to these episodes where you've been the host or where you've been a guest, like you do honestly sound like a natural, and I think that's something that it's just internal to yourself that you probably pick up on the flaws and, I've not said that right or not done that right. But to everyone else, you just sound like Ian,
Yeah, that's very kind of you to say, and that is absolutely right. Is whenever you're giving any kind of presentation in any way, whether that be a podcast or presenting at a conference, for example, you always kind of come away with it thinking, oh, I didn't do very good there. I could have done that better. But that's it is just a little voice in your head just telling you that. In reality, it's probably not the case.
No. And Himesh, yourself, you were obviously the second host. How do you feel now having been away from the podcast a little bit? Do you miss it? Do you still wish you were doing it? Or are you happy with what you contributed to the podcast?
Yeah, no, so I'm happy with obviously what I contributed and sort of the ideas that I brought, but it's something I do miss a little bit because, like you say, you get to speak to so many people you don't normally get to speak to every day and in different parts of the business as well. So that part I do miss, to be honest, but I'm quite happy with what I did.
Yeah. And when was it you took over from Ian? I think it was last year, right? November time.
Yeah, so I think that's when I officially took over, but I volunteered probably a few weeks before then. So Ian had a few more episodes left to record. So then I joined, and then we kind of like had some ideas and things like this.
Yeah.
And just trying to put my own sort of fingerprint on it, because obviously what Ian and the team had already come up with was really great. I just wanted to kind of help expand on that. So I didn't want to like change everything completely or anything like that, because what they've done so far was so good. So I just wanted to build up on it. So then we had a few weeks of discussion, and then I started recording my first few episodes.
And I think that's just normal when someone takes over. Like even for myself, I'm not gonna reinvent the wheel here and completely overhaul what's been done, because we've got to this stage because of how amazing it's been so far. But you get a chance to bring in your own personality and just your way of doing things. So yeah, I think that's really important, as you said, just putting your own stamp on it, and as you said, like bringing in your own style.
Yeah, definitely.
We've all, sorry to interject, we've always thought that to be a good thing of changing the host for two reasons. We want to give such opportunities to everyone at Veramed to do such a thing as hosting the podcast. We don't want it to be just one person. And also, as you've touched on there, having a new host, it just freshens it up a little bit. You don't need to change it completely, but just new ideas, new perspective, just a slightly different style of presenting. It can have a lot of benefits. So yeah, there will be new hosts again in the future. It's just the way the cycle goes, and that's a really, really good thing.
Yeah, and you'll never be able to escape anyway, because that's you both on as a guest for this episode. So yeah, I suspect in the future, I'm sure I'll be roped in at some point when I hand over the reins to someone else. But back to you, Himesh. Like you managed, I think we already mentioned that you published 40 episodes and you had a lot of good ideas. Is there like a particular topic that was your favorite? Was there one that stands out to you that you remember?
There was quite a few actually, but I would probably say that my favorite one was actually one of the first ones I recorded, which was our neurodiversity episode, which you mentioned earlier was actually our longest episode.
Yeah.
So it was fun and challenging at the same time, because we had three guests on. And because we're talking about something that's very personal to each guest, you had to make sure everyone's got enough time to talk, express themselves, but without going over and like diverting from the topic and questions. And it's a lot of active listening.
Yes.
The recording of the episode probably took over an hour, and I think the main episode was probably about 40 odd minutes, or maybe 45 minutes, something like that. So after that, I was exhausted because like, you're really listening, trying to structure all together. And I think at the time it was probably the second podcast I'd recorded. So I was still quite new to it, but I was really pleased with the way it turned out. I got some fantastic feedback from it, internally and externally, actually. So yeah, I was really proud of that. And yeah, I'm really pleased with how it turned out in the end.
No, you did a fantastic job, because even now, based on that episode and just having that start for a neurodiversity group, we've now got a training, that it just got rolled out a couple of weeks ago, and there's loads of things now happening within that group. But that episode is what kind of put the group on the market, even internally, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so they had mentioned something about starting the group a few weeks prior to the recording of the episode. So I thought, this would be a great opportunity for you to sort of explain what the group is and your personal stories and how it's going to help. So at the time, the group was very much in its infancy. And I think because of that episode and all the work that team has done themselves, like they've really have grown and done so many things, like you mentioned, like trainings and all these other sort of like posts and things like that, to kind of make everyone more aware of our neurodiverse colleagues. And yeah, it's been really good, and I'm quite pleased to see how far that group has come as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it just goes to show with, everything that we've spoken about so far, that the podcast has helped Veramed, internally and externally. So Ian, is there anything else you can think of that this podcast has, helped Veramed in some way?
I think, the obvious point is just regarding getting our stories out there, as it were, in terms of what we're up to. It allows us to reach out to people on a global scale. Obviously, a podcast is accessible for many people across the world. It can help for new clients. It can help for new kind of recruitment people. So yeah, it has provided such a benefit already. Countless number of times that we've heard something like, so when somebody's come in for an interview, they've said something like, "Oh yeah, I listened to the podcast and it really gave a good impression of Veramed." that's fantastic to hear. And that's one of the key reasons why we wanted to do this in the first place.
Yeah.
But also, you know, like the Coders Corners episode, for example, that's an opportunity for us to give knowledge to not just internally at Veramed, but to people outside of Veramed. And that's kind of it's just a kind of a different slant that the podcast has gone in, where it's not all about promoting Veramed, as it were, but we also want to kind of share our knowledge with others.
Yeah, and give something back to the listeners as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as you touched on, we talked about the B Corp type thing as well. What the podcast does, it kind of grows our reputation as a kind of force for good in the industry. I went to the PSI conference last year. No, it wasn't, sorry. It was earlier this year.
This year.
Yeah. It seems like it was that long ago. It was earlier this year. And the amount of people that came up to me and obviously recognized my name and face from the podcast. And we're like, no, it's really, really great that you've done that. And, you know, people mentioned they listen to it. So it's feedback such as that, which is, you know, really, really, really good to hear.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Himesh, have you found that, like, because I know you're in the Twickenham office, right?
Yeah.
Like when new people join, like, do they tend to mention the podcast when you speak to them?
Yeah, it's it's quite funny actually, because obviously when someone joins the company, you just want to introduce yourself. So I'm like, hello, my name's Himesh, nice to meet you. They're like, oh, you host the podcast. I listened to it, and I'm like, oh, I feel like a little celebrity. So it's a bit of an odd one, because once I record it, like the first few, I re-listened to it to make sure I was okay. But after a while, you don't want to hear your own voice, so I stopped listening to it. So to me, it was just part of my job. So I just did a podcast, and then it got published. So I kind of forget about them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I listened to this episode; it was really good and stuff." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, of course, I forgot that other people listen to this." So yeah, it was a bit of an odd feeling to begin with, but nice, and is like you both said, it's nice to know that other people are listening to it, and it's one of the reasons why they choose to work here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that leads me on to probably the last thing we're going to discuss in this episode, and that's just finding out from yourselves what are some of your favourite episodes. So Ian, is there a few in particular that stand out for you?
Yeah, it's kind of a tough one, that. I think the one that comes to mind straight away is that I think it was episode 4. So this is an episode that I did with Dana Stewart on the topic of company culture. Now, this to me set the foundations for a lot of other episodes. So I think a lot of the other topics that we talked about, neurodiversity, mental health, for example, they kind of come under the umbrella of company culture. But we had such a great discussion about what makes a good company culture, and Dana was able to share some of her experiences, both kind of from previous companies, and as her another unofficial job title is she's the guardian of culture at Veramed. So you know, she it was great to hear from her on that. The other one, which was actually the last episode I did before I did the episode where I introduced Himesh, and this was we had 3 members of the 2021 graduate intake join the podcast to talk about their experiences and talking through the graduate training program we did, and then what initial projects they were assigned to. And that was just so nice to hear, like how much they had developed in just a year and how much they've enjoyed their first year at Veramed. It was such a nice episode to kind of finish on, as you like.
Yeah.
And then probably just maybe you could call it a vain choice if you like, but episode 10 was a big deal for me. It was actually just one where I did a monologue talking about my challenges with mental health, but that was important for me to put that out there. And you know, following that, I did get so many people reach out with some really kind feedback, and a lot of people reached out saying that it helped them, which meant so much. Like if one person had reached out and said, Ian, that was really useful, I've been perfect for me, but I had many people that sort of reaching out to me to say such nice things. So yeah, that was a big deal for me, and something I'm certainly proud of.
Yeah. And that was actually one of my favorite episodes, was that one. Just as you said, like, you put yourself out there, and it is a really tough thing to talk about these things, but that's why it was such a special and important episode, because if no one talks, then how are we, like, we want to show that we are here to support and be there for people, and you've like paved the way for that open communication. So yeah, for me, I really resonated with that episode. And again, just thank you for like your strength and your bravery for coming on to such a big platform and talking about those things. As you said, it's definitely helped so many people, including myself. But not to step in front of you, Himesh. I know you said the neurodiversity one was probably one of your favourite episodes. As you said, you had 3 guests and they all had very different experiences. So yeah, I know that was a really good episode and one of your favourite ones. Is there any others that come to mind as part of your favourite episodes?
Yeah, so I think for me, some of my favorite episodes were ones where they weren't necessarily talking about topics within our industry, but more about the person I'm interviewing and quite personal topics. So some of my other favorite ones, other than neurodiversity, was the Pride episode that we did. I did an episode on for Men's Health Month as well, and we've got some very personal stories out of it. So again, like you said, it's like you have to talk about these things so people know that it's okay to talk about. And it was just like a bit of a learning experience for me as well, personally, just because I don't think I'm an expert in any of these topics. So it's nice to be able to speak to people who are from these communities or like have experienced these health issues or anything personally, and get their perspective on things, and trying to balance the episodes out with sort of the questions you ask them, making sure they feel comfortable, make sure we're getting the story across, but without stepping on their toes, and trying to make it entertaining at the same time. So yeah, those were probably some of my favorites. And the other things I was quite proud of was our Meet the Board miniseries, which I was quite keen to get launched. So the whole purpose of that was to interview our board members individually and try and just get a bit more information about them. Like, how did you start your career? What did you do before joining Veramed? And how did you come to Veramed, and what ideas have you implemented, and what would you like to see in the future? Because we all know who they are, but we don't know who they are, if you know what I mean. So I thought that'd be quite a nice thing to do, both for internally and externally. And we mentioned Coder's Corner as well. So that was another thing I was quite proud of, just because they're helpful tips for anyone, programming, statistician, anyone using SAS. And we have these things internally anyway, so it'd be quite nice to like share them. But then trying to find a way of doing it, of verbally talking about codes and tips, and then trying to make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Exactly. So then, thankfully, because of our marketing team, we managed to get some visual aids out as well to accompany the episodes. So yeah, they're the things I was probably most proud of while I was hosting.
Yeah, and I would like agree with that too. I have recorded a couple of Meet the Board now, and I think there's still one left to come out. And again, with the Coder's Corner, as you said, it is quite hard to just sit and talk about code. So even though it was me, I was like, wow, that's amazing that they are just, chatting away about this complex piece of programming, but at the same time, it makes sense, So I think I just feel honoured to be able to keep going with those things that you have set up when you were host. So yes, I think that is us come to the end of the podcast, the end of this episode. So thank you both, Himesh and Ian, for joining me on this very special episode. I hope you've both enjoyed it.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, and here's to the next 50.
Here's to the next 50. Wow, that'll take a good long time. But yes, thank you all very much for listening. If you would like to be notified for any future episodes, please subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whichever podcast platform you're using. If you would like to know more about Veramed, please visit our website at veramed.co.uk, or you can find us on LinkedIn. If you've got any questions about Veramed, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and you're also welcome to reach out to Himesh and Ian as well. We'll always be happy to help and answer any questions. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at We Are Veramed. So yeah, thank you all for listening, and until next time, see you later.